Yo, welcome to my Summer Lair. I'm your host, Sammy Younan. I'm super excited today. I get to talk to Todd Douglas Miller, who recently directed Apollo 11. This is an extraordinary documentary. I can't even. It's hard to put in words to convey the size, the scope of the documentary. It really captures the engineering feat, the just the conquering of science and engineering, everything that it took to get us from Earth to the moon. Kennedy said in the early 60s that he wanted to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Unfortunately, he didn't last. He didn't make it to the end of the decade. He perished in 63. But by 69, we were on the moon. And Apollo 11 is that documentary just of them launching the rocket and getting to the moon. It's a phenomenal documentary. The size, the scope, it's deeply impressive. Looking back at it too, it's really weird because we have all this like technology with like cell phones and cloud computing and all these kind of things, and you look back at Apollo 11 and you're like, how did they pull this off? It's crazy. The other thing that's super weird about the documentary is I don't know about you, but I've been so conditioned by CGI that when you see something real, like a rocket taking off, when you hear it, when you see it, it's a different type of senses that get engaged, and it almost doesn't. It looks surreal. It doesn't look bright, almost. You know what I mean? We've been conditioned by how perfect and nuanced CGI is, and real life. Like even when the boosters were firing, there's all this kind of snow and ice kind of chipping away, and just the way that it was falling, the different types of pieces. Yeah, it's crazy. Highly recommend this documentary. I'm super excited to talk to Todd Douglas Miller. So here's my conversation with him. This is my Summer Lair.
Live from Pacific Junction Hotel, Girth Radio.
Hello, Todd.
Hi, I'm here.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking some time.
Yeah, no problem.
It's an extraordinary documentary. You did a great job. You and the whole team. I know it was a combined effort.
Oh, thanks so much. That's very kind.
Mm-hmm. Are you ready to go?
Yep. Ready when you are.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question up front. There's many astronauts associated with the Apollo program. Do you have a particular favorite astronaut, or is there a couple of astronauts that kind of stand out to you and that kind of captivate your attention?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with Michael Collins. I feel like he is the forgotten astronaut on certainly within the Apollo program, but on Apollo 11. But what's really great about Mike Collins is he wrote this amazing book in 1974 called Carrying the Fire, and it's arguably the best book written by an astronaut. It's a classic, but it's also one of my favorite books of all time. So in reading that, even in my younger years, and then kind of rediscovering it in the making of this film, it just it ages like a fine wine. It's really amazing, and it really depicts everything about the space program and why so many people are attracted to it. And certainly his personal experiences on Apollo 11 are reflected in the film and that he wrote about in that book. So I would say Michael Collins is right up there, but it's very hard to pick a favorite. They're all just so extraordinary. The fact that there was thousands of people that applied for this job, and it was just a very select group to be able to do it reinforces that idea.
Yeah, Collins actually, weirdly enough, this sounds weird out loud, but he kind of provided some of the humor in the movie as well.
Yeah, and it comes across when you talk to him. He's just he's a very witty guy, very grounded, and kind of is for me is the glue that binds. And that's certainly evident in his book, in his first book that he wrote.
So there's a powerful word that's used 3 or 4 times in the Apollo 11 documentary, and it's curiosity. NASA truly didn't know what was going to be out there when they went to the moon, or what to fully expect. And that kind of mirrors your documentary filmmaking process. You didn't know what kind of film footage was out there or what to expect. Can you give us a snapshot of the 3-year journey, gathering all that footage?
Yeah, I guess we were really rolling the dice, if you will. It was a bit of a gamble in the beginning, but one thing that we did know was that this was such a well-documented event. So in looking through all the materials that we had access to, we knew fairly early on, even before the discovery of the large format or any of the tens of 10,000 hours of 11,000 hours of audio from Mission Control and some of the other audio that came our way. We knew we had something special, just in the simple fact that we wanted to make a film as filmmakers that had not really been depicted before. So I think, one could argue you could certainly, even without the exquisite material that ended up in the film, all the large format stuff visually, it's still compelling. It's still one of the most amazing things that humans, if not arguably the most amazing thing that humans have done.
Mm-hmm.
So that by its very nature, if you just step out of the way of it all from a filmmaking standpoint and you let all of that material speak for itself, we knew that we could make something special out of it. But then, of course, with the discovery of the large format, it just reinforces that idea. And then with the audio, it was at times very challenging to say the least, but it was something that was very rewarding to work on as well throughout the years.
I want to pick up on a couple of the threads you said, which is things that the general public hasn't seen, and also the audio, because there's a great moment where the lunar module is about to land on the moon, and in the lower left side of the screen, there's an alarm code that's like in red. I think it was 1202 was the code. So what was the process to kind of obviously get that information from Mission Control, but also kind of how to decide how to visually like display it, and so people can see it, hear it, just as the astronauts and Mission Control are dealing with this alarm code just as they're about to land on the moon. So it's got a really like palpable bit of suspense.
Yeah, well, there's two things that are in there in the film that really haven't been heard before. People know of it, but it hadn't been depicted before. So the alarms you're referring to are the 1202 and the 1201 alarms. The 1202 comes on twice, and the 1201 came on later and during the landing sequence. They were both alarms, program alarms for the exact same thing. Basically, the computer was getting overridden, or there was too many tasks for it to complete. And it was giving the astronauts an alarm and Mission Control to say, I've got to do too much right now. But what I had always wanted to know was there an audible tone? Because I talked to some of the astronauts and they had said that there was audible program alarms going off. On some of the onboard audio with some of the various Apollo missions, you could hear it, but I didn't know if it was, in the lunar module, whether that was on their headsets, whether it was, in the cabin itself. So we challenged NASA's, the chief historian in his department, and they actually did some research and found a document that had the actual kilohertz tone of what that was, and it was indeed. It was an on-off tone that went through the headset. So, we got to play that, give it to our sound design team. They designed the scene with that audible tone in there. We got to play it for Buzz Aldrin. Is this exactly what it sounded like? How many tones was it? And kind of work with him to get it as accurate as we possibly could. And then there was also on the Mission Control side, there was a 24-year-old flight controller named Jack Garman who was sitting in the back room. He was working under a flight controller named Steve Bales in the front room. And it was just when the alarms started first going off, no one in Mission Control knew what it was, except for this 24-year-old flight controller in the back room, Jack Garman, who had trained on it just, completely coincidentally out of the blue a few days before. So he referenced a checklist and knew that it wasn't, something that was going to put the astronauts or the spacecraft in imminent danger, and was able to relay that information to Steve Bales. Bales immediately said it to Charlie Duke, and the flight director Gene Kranz, and they could communicate that to the capsule. So you hear that in the film, which is very significant.
Yeah, you're mentioning the mission control and the astronauts and stuff, but on your team as well, you have a Toronto connection. There's a gentleman, Ben Feist, who's on your team. Can you kind of share what his contributions were to the documentary?
Oh yeah, Ben's great, and also our IMAX mixer, Brian Eimer, is up in Toronto. But yeah, Ben was. I met Ben. We had done a short film on Apollo 17, and I was editing that film, and then halfway through it, and it was a short film. I had discovered Ben had a website called apollo17.org, and I went on it, and somebody had alerted me, one of the archive producers, to it, and I looked and I go, this is exactly what I needed like 6 months ago when I first started editing, the short film. So I connected with him. And at the time, he was working for an ad agency in Toronto, but he was the head of their technology department. And in his spare time, he was a space nut, like all of us. So between myself and Ben and Stephen Slater in the UK, our archive producer, and also in conjunction with Robert Perlman, who was our private historian and tech consultant down in Houston, the four of us just kind of developed this need to just be as accurate as humanly possible when it came to Apollo 17. So when this project rolled around, we already had our team, kind of the core team, in place from a tech standpoint. But when where Ben's real expertise wasn't just in evaluating, scenes and giving his opinion on accuracy. We had come across 18,000 hours, or been given access to 18,000 hours of Apollo era audio. That was part of a speech recognition project that the University of Texas, Austin, had been working with NASA on. So they digitized all this audio, and 11,000 hours of it was strictly for Apollo 11. And then we didn't know what to do with it. It was very poor quality. It wasn't synced up in any way. It was basically a series of files that were sitting on drives. So Ben, being Ben Feist, if you know him, he's very analytical. And had, instead of us giving it to our audio team to just try to clean up, Ben approached this as a tech problem, and he put together a small team and working with NASA too, down at JSC, on a way to not only clean up all the audio, but also write some code, software, and algorithms that attack this large data set and to sync it all up. So all of us on the editorial side, we could actually go through it in a very concise way. The audio made sense. It was cleaned up. It was de-interleaved. And we could literally put all of the tracks up on all the mission controllers, anyone who had a headset on, and just on and off it at any given moment in time. And it was just a phenomenal piece of work that they did, and a phenomenal tool that we had at our disposal in the edit suite. And Ben, through his work while we were working on Apollo 11, was actually hired by Johnson Space Center down in Houston. So he currently works for NASA.
Nice. So I bring that up because there's clearly like a deep reverence, and you mentioned being space nuts. Was it just kind of you wanted to make sure that people truly understood how important the moon landing was? Is that what was the driving force in terms of, because there's no fingerprints on this. The documentary doesn't feel like a Todd Douglas Miller documentary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely wanted it to feel like it came from all of us. So, and by all of us, I mean even the audience. All of this imagery and all of these sounds, everything that went into it is a reflection of who we are as people. And who we are as a society, that all of us did this one thing, or at least, the generation before us, or a couple generations for some before us, did something like this. So I think by just, stepping back and letting the imagery speak for itself, it certainly has, it resonates with me. I watch it, the film. Usually we make films, we don't watch them, but I try to go to every single screening. I sit through them. I'm sure a lot of the projectionists are just annoyed with me because I like to sit right next to the projector if I can. But it just speaks to the wonderful team that worked on this. I mean, we did feel an immense responsibility, particularly when We had so much footage that hadn't been seen by the public before. We just felt just such a need to archive it properly, to curate it, and to preserve it for future generations.
Yeah, there's a moment kind of echoing what you're saying early on in the documentary where the astronauts, Buzz and the team, are getting all suited up. And I think it's Walter Cronkite kind of doing talking, and he mentions the burden of the astronauts. And that was something I had never really considered before. Just the huge, like, I understood the immenseness of what they were doing, but as a burden, that's an unusual choice of words.
Yeah, the astronauts' core was very close. It was almost, a lot of these guys came from the military. A lot of them had, most, but not all of them had college degrees, and they were kind of the evolution of what the perfect astronaut was going to be, which was this mix of steel nerves and intelligence. And I think when you look at the Apollo 11 group, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, when they're getting suited up, you just see it, just on their shoulders, just the weight of this thing, and you see it written on their faces. And certainly, as they're going out to go do this thing, they represent all of us. And it certainly wasn't lost on any of us that were working with the materials. And it's just a real testament to not only them, but you see it, in the mission controllers that were up for all hours of the days and nights, making sure that this thing was successful.
Is that a different type of masculinity as well? Because even not just the astronauts, but mission control too. You see a lot of the dudes that are working there, and it's a type of masculinity. There's a stoicism you kind of mentioned. Like, there's something we just don't kind of see anymore. Of just like, they knew what they were doing was historical, but they also knew they had a job to do, and they just kind of went ahead and did it. They kind of executed.
Yeah, if you just take Buzz Aldrin's past. I mean, these guys fought in the Korean War. Him and Neil both. Buzz, they were fighter pilots. They lost a lot of their friends, and they did things that happen in war. They shot down, planes, and they were also, these amazing test pilots too. Neil himself, had gotten his astronaut wings long before he ever, stepped into a Gemini capsule during the X-15 project. So I think it just speaks to the level of, their dedication, their concentration, and certainly their love of their jobs too. And I think the film, unlike anything, I'm not saying this because we made it, but I think you really get that sense of that when it's reflected. I did want to just go back real quick. You had mentioned the burdens with Walter Cronkite.
Yeah.
And Cronkite, we use him twice, and he actually, the quote is the burdens and the hopes. And the minute we heard that, or I heard that, I just thought it was just perfect reflection on what was, I don't want to psychoanalyze what the astronauts were going through, but certainly what I felt like when I was watching them in the suiting up shots. That's what I felt. And and Walter Cronkite, I mean, he did that entire speech the day of the mission, and it was off the cuff. He wasn't reading from a card. So it just goes to show you how, and then he was enormously invested in the space program from a journalistic standpoint, but also he represented, just a vast, the thoughts that were going through not only the American minds, but people worldwide. And I just thought it was such a poetic statement about what was going through their heads. So that was the reason why we used that.
Yeah, I mean, it stood out. Like, as soon as he said it, I was like, oh, man, like, because again, like, we've been kind of, I guess, inoculated. Like, we have iPhones and self-driving cars and things like that. So it feels like we have a lot of technology and a lot of progress. But when you look back at the enormous task of what they were trying to do, and it's not even just like the technology of just trying to get to the moon or to launch a rocket. They also had to broadcast it on television, like you mentioned, Walter Cronkite. So is the process that you and Ben and the rest of your team in terms of digitizing and scanning footage and film, cleaning up audio, is that done now that the film is done, or is that still an ongoing process?
It's an ongoing process. The film was one facet of what we're doing. We survived a couple of government shutdowns last year.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
the most recent one certainly didn't do us any favors. Unfortunately, the first thing to go, even if it's a partial shutdown, are science centers, museums, NASA, National Archives. If astronauts are, up on the space station, good luck. There'll be a few people that'll be monitoring you. So I think, and that certainly all of that really hit home for us. We had some materials that were kind of in flux. At no time was that any, we had backup plans in case, something had happened. So at no time was, the actual negative from any of the materials we were working with in jeopardy. But certainly, it hit home that, private entities, commercial operations are vital to the lifeblood of the government. They need all of us. If you go on nasa.gov and you look at all the wonderful transcripts from the Apollo missions, those are the work of volunteers. NASA didn't do that. So they manage it. They make sure that, things are in check, and there's wonderful people that work over there. But the vast majority of all the legwork of all that stuff are just people like us that, have a vested interest in it, want to see it, protected, want to make sure that the historical record is correct. So the second part of our project, working with the National Archives, is to do just that, is to digitize all the other ancillary material that's not specific to Apollo 11, preserve it, to curate it properly, and ultimately to archive it and work with them to make it available to everyone.
What you just said is interesting, how nowadays in 2019, when we have a government shutdown, one of the first things to go is basically science, is what you're saying, all the science centers and some of the NASA programs and things like that. But when you look back at the footage in your film, you see literally a sea of people, just civilians, just fascinated by this science and by this rocket and where this is going. And it's such a contrast of where we've come to where we are.
Yeah, I think, events like this, if we're lucky in our lifetime, we'll get to see the first, footprints on the moon. Events like this are vital to who we are. It's in our DNA to be explorers. And certainly from a practical standpoint, the Earth is not going to be around forever. It might not happen, for another million years, but we're going to have to get off of this, this rock to survive as a species. So I think by showcasing, high quality imagery from back then of our, this first event when we spread our wings and got out there and, set foot on another world, it really has the effect, just like it did back then. We hope today it brings people together. And it certainly did for us as we were working on it. And, we're just so happy to finally present it to audiences.
I'll get you out on this last question. The Apollo 11 was obviously the culmination of the space race between America and Russia. JFK had, in the early 60s, had said, we're going to do this. Right now, we're currently living through a billionaire space race with Bezos and Elon Musk and others. If money was no object, and it seems like this would be a yes for you, but if money was no object, would you go to the moon with one of the companies we have today and become a space tourist?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I'd be first in line.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, these private companies are always, that's always been a part of NASA. NASA obviously was a lot more involved with the building of these, vehicles back during the Apollo era and before, but now, they are customers. And it, my hope is that there's tons of customers for all of these private companies, and that, it'll just only increase not only tourism, but scientific, endeavors throughout, the moon, Mars, and beyond.
Yeah, your doc is definitely inspiring. Again, just seeing it again and just because I think we get a little sanitized, oh yeah, we went to the moon in 1969. And then that's kind of all everybody says. But when you actually see it and see what it actually took, it's like, wow, that was a lot of effort. That was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, hundreds of thousands of people. And it was always our hope that, hopefully, we built this thing to last, the film. We're shocked by the reaction right now. We kind of thought, 20 years from now, that's when we'll have our moment, with the people will look back. But certainly, we put enough Easter eggs in there that it deserves repeat viewing, kind of demands it. which is why I go and watch it all the time.
Yeah.
But certainly, we also wanted it to be used as a primer for, hopefully engineers and people that are less represented. They could get excited about this, and particularly the younger generation too. They could see something that their grandfathers or great grandfathers did, and it'll inspire them.
All right, we got to end it there. Thank you, Todd, for taking some time. Thank you for the documentary. And I guess I should give a shout out to science and all the engineers at NASA and all the astronauts and everybody who made this majestic space miracle happen. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So that was my interview with Todd Douglas Miller, director and editor of Apollo 11, an extraordinary documentary. If you have a chance, go see it. It is definitely worth it in IMAX, and it is definitely worth pants. To follow me, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at My Pal Sammy. It's My Pal Sammy for all three. Thanks for listening. Space, yo.